Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Colleen Thouez. I am a senior fellow at Sciences Po in Paris and also at the New School here in New York where I am based, and I'm so pleased to be able to be with you for this event on the Urban Summit and to take a stab at Mayor Rees's question, which is how can cities help us get to the future that we want? And I'm going to speak very specifically about my own experience in working with cities and mayors in advancing migration and refugee policy at the international level. Very much inspired by the work of Dr. Benjamin Barber, the late Dr. Barber, and his book, If Mayors Ruled the World, speaks about the leadership of cities in the transnational challenges of our time, be it around migration, refugee protection, climate, public health, and so on. And it's been my deep pleasure to be working with mayors such as Mayor Marvin Rees for the last few years to really advocate for cities to be much more present in the negotiations and in the deliberations on international migration policy. So back in 2018, before the negotiations of the first ever international agreement on migration, known as the UN Global Compact for Migration, Mayor Rees came to the United Nations and very convincingly shared with national governments the fact that it would be impossible or very difficult to implement the commitments that they were making in this agreement around access to essential services, delivery of services, facilitating mobility, and ensuring all sorts of protections for migrants and refugees without the partnerships that are required at the local level and with cities and other sub-regional governments. That was 4 years ago, and today, or rather last week, again at the United Nations, during the first review of this international agreement and to the extent it is being implemented by national governments, cities were absolutely at the forefront. In fact, I think on an advocacy front, we really have turned a corner. We are no longer thinking and speaking about whether cities should be at the table when it comes to policy making at the national level, at the interregional level, and at the global level, but rather what needs to happen now that they are at the table. And that's where I'd like to concentrate my remarks, is at what we as advocates for mayors, as leaders on transnational issues, and as cities, as first responders, more responsive government in many instances, more creative government with direct mandates to represent and also to serve their jurisdiction and the people that they serve. What do we do once we have local governments at the table of national and international decision making so that we get to the future that we want? And I have two suggestions, two recommendations on this front. The first is to make sure that mayors and cities really can be represented in policy discussions, and that they're not necessarily, or that they're not only dependent on their national governments in order to participate. And what I mean by that is we still have this expectation that national delegations will call on cities and mayors to be represented as part of a national delegation. And why that's a very good thing. In many national contexts, we have leading mayors who are in oppositional circumstances with their national government, and their voices will be stifled unless they have a real opportunity to represent themselves. So we should really be looking at a new principle in international affairs, in international relations, that is the self-representation of cities when it comes to policy making, again, globally, interregionally, and everywhere. We see the advances that cities have made, whether it's with the climate agreement or the agreement that I've just referred to, the Global Compact on Migration, and many others. Cities need to be able to, and mayors need to be able to self-represent in these policy circles, to share information from the ground in real time, and to be able to be partners in their own right with UN agencies, with international NGOs, and with other actors on the international stage. The second kind of new principle for international relations, when we look at the value and the importance of cities as international actors, or mayors as global leaders, as Dr. Barber used to say, is that they need to be able to self-stand. And what I mean by self-stand is they need to be able to access funding and resources on their own. Funding is good, and many cities, I'll take the example of Freetown, the work that the mayor of Freetown and the city of Freetown is doing as part of its Transform Freetown agenda is 80% funded through private funding sources, international organizations with the World Bank, IFIs, and also through private foundation funding. So funding is good, but funding is not sufficient. If we really want to see a transformation in our understanding of the central role that local governments play in advancing the challenges and developing and achieving the future that we want, we need to make sure that cities can have the type of financing, whether it's through the raising of their own revenue, through reforms to tax systems, and also by understanding how they can have access to financial markets. Many of the obstacles to that date back to, and I do say date back to, an interstate system that is simply not one that is fit for our times, that does not recognize the importance of local government and local governance in being both a problem solver and another actor who we can hold accountable for getting to the future we want. So as we advocate for cities and mayors to be able to self-represent, and as we advocate for cities and mayors to be able to access financing and funding to be able to do the work that is needed, we call on all of you to understand what this new paradigm could look like, to understand that it will lead to many other questions, that it will in effect upend the current interstate system, but that we also know that there's a need for change, there's a time for change, and that time is now. Thank you.